Hatchet Chapter 11. There were things to do. He transferred all the eggs from the small beach into the shelter, reburying them near his sleeping area. It took all of his will to keep from eating another one as he moved them, but he got it done, and when they were out of sight again, it was easier. He added to the wood of the fire and cleaned up the camp area. A good laugh, that, cleaning up the camp. All he did was shake out his windbreaker and hang it in the sun to dry the berry juice that soaked in and smooth the sand where he slept. But it was a mental thing. He had gotten depressed thinking about how they had forgotten him. Yet, when he was busy and had something to do with the depression, seemed to leave. When he was busy and had something to do, the depression seemed to leave. So there were things to do. With the camp squared away, he brought in more wood. He decided to always have enough on for 3 days. After spending one night with the fire for a friend, he knew what a staggering amount of wood it would take. He worked all through morning at the wood, breaking down dead limbs and breaking or chopping them in small pieces, storing them neatly beneath the overhang. He stopped once to take a drink at the lake, and the reflection he saw. He stopped once to take a drink at the lake, and his reflection he saw that the swelling on his head was nearly gone. There was no pain there, and he assumed that he had taken care of itself. His leg was also back to normal, although he had a small pattern of holes, roughly star-shaped, where the quills had nailed him. And while he was standing at the lake shore taking stock, he noticed that his body was changing. He had never been fat, but he had been slightly heavy, with a little extra weight just above his belt at the sides. This was completely gone, and his stomach had caved into the hunger, and the sun had cooked him past burning, so he was tanning. And with the smoke from the fire, his face was starting to look like leather. But perhaps more than his body was a change in his mind, or in the way he was becoming. I am not the same, he thought. I see, I hear differently. He did not know when the change had started, but it was there. When a sound came to him now, he just didn't hear it, but would have known the sound. He would swing and look at it, a breaking twig, a movement of air, and know the sound as if he somehow could move his mind back down the wave, the sound to its source. He could know now that the sound that the sound was before he realized he had heard it. And when he saw something, a bird moving a wing inside a bush or ripple on the water, he would truly see things, not just noticed as if he used to and notice things in the city. He would see all the parts of it and see the whole wing, the feathers, see the color of feathers, see the bush and the size and shape and color of the leaves. He would see the way the light moved through the ripples in the water and see that the wind made ripples, and which way the wind had to blow to make the ripples move in a certain way. None of this used to be in Brian, and now it was part of him, changed him, a grown part of him, and two things, his mind and body, came together as well. He had made a connection with each other and didn't quite understand. When his ears heard a sound, or when his eyes saw a sight, his mind took control of his body. Without thinking, he moved to face the sound or sight, moved to make ready for it, to deal with it. There were things to do. When the wood was done, he decided to get a signal fire ready. He moved to the top of the rock ridge and comprised the bluff over the shelter, and was pleased to find a large, flat stone area. More wood, he thought, moaning inwardly. He went back to the fallen trees and found more dead limbs, carrying them up the rock until he had enough for a bonfire. Initially, he had thought of making a signal fire every day, but he couldn't. He would never be able to keep the wood supply going. So while he was working, he decided to have the fire ready, and if he heard an engine or even thought he heard a plane engine, he would run up with a burning limb and set the signal fire. Things to do. At the last trip, the top of the smoke bluff with the woody stop stood on the point overlooking the lake and rested. The lake before him, 20 or so feet below, he had not seen in this way since he was in the plane. Remembering the crash, he had a moment of fear, a breathing tight little rip of terror, but it passed, and he was quickly caught up in the beauty of the scenery. It was so incredibly beautiful that it was almost unreal. From this height he could see not just the lake, but across the part of the forest, a green carpet, and it was full of life, birds, insects. There was a constant hum and song. At the other end of the bottom of the L, there was another rock sticking out of the water. On top of the rock, a snaggly pine had somehow found food and grown, bent and gnarled. Sitting on a limb was a blue bird with a crest and a sharp beak, a kingfisher, he thought, from the picture he had seen once, which left the branch while he watched and dove into the water. It emerged a split part of leather. It emerged a split part of a second later. In its mouth was a small fish, wiggling silver in the sun. It took the fish to a limb, juggled it twice, and swallowed it whole. Fish. Of course, he thought. There were fish in the lake, and they were food. And if a bird could do it, he scrambled down to the side of the bluff, trotting on the edge of the lake, looking down into the water. Somehow, it had never occurred to him that to look inside the water, only the surface. The sun was flashing back up into his eyes, and he moved off to the side and took his shoes off and waited 15 feet. Then he turned and stood still with the sun at his back and studied the water again. It was, he saw in a moment, literally packed with fish. Small fish swam everywhere, some narrow and long, some round, most of them 3 or 4 inches long, some a bit larger, and many smaller. It was a patch of mud off to the side, leading into a deeper water, and he could see a old clamshell there. So there must be clams. As he watched, a crayfish, looking like a tiny lobster, left one of the empty clamshells and went for another, looking for something to eat, digging with its claws. While he stood, some of the small, round fish came quite close to his legs, and he tensed up and got ready to make a wild stab at grabbing one of them, then exploded in 100 flicks of quick light, so fast that he could not, they exploded away in 100 flicks of quick light, so fast he could have no hope of catching them that way. But they soon come back. They seemed to be curious about him, and as if he walked from the water and tried to think of a way to use the curiosity to catch them. He had no hooks or string, but if he could somehow lure them to the shadows and make a spear, a small fish spear, he might be able to strike fast enough to get one. He would have to find the right kind of wood, slim and straight. He had seen some willows up along the lake that might work. He might use the hatchet to sharpen it, and while it was sticking by the fire tonight, shape it while he was sitting by the fire tonight. And that brought up the fire, which he'd need to feed again. He looked at the sun, saw it was getting late in the afternoon, and when he thought of how late he thought that he ought to reward all of his work with another egg, and that made him think of some kind of dessert would be nice. He smiled, and he thought of dessert so fancy. He wondered if he should move up the lake and see if he could find some raspberries after he banked the fire, and while he was looking for the right wood for the spear. Spear wood, he thought, and he rolled it together, and rolled over him. There were things to do.